On this episode of Projector, we got a comedy double bill. Simon Pegg discovers he's been granted the power to do absolutely anything, while another hit UK TV series comes to the big screen in the Bad Education movie. Hello and welcome to Projector, and first up, Simon Pegg discovers he can do absolutely anything in the new film from Monty Python's Terry Jones. A message sent from Earth looking for alien life is intercepted by a galactic council, voiced by John Cleese, Michael Palin, Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam, who perform a test to see whether absolute power will be used for good or evil, which will decide where the planet will be destroyed. This power is placed in the right hand of schoolteacher Neil, played by Simon Pegg, who is unaware of its origins. But as Neil comes to realise just what he can do, he begins to think that he might have a chance of getting his neighbour Catherine, played by Kate Beckinsale, to fall in love with him. Absolutely Anything has terrific potential. It has a stellar all-star cast, including a Monty Python reunion and the late Robin Williams in its final role. Terry Jones returns to the director's chair after a 2-decade absence, and a premise where literally anything is possible. Unfortunately, that last part turns out to be more of a handicap than a positive. The concept of having godlike powers has been used before, most notably in Bruce Almighty, and the natural use and misuse of those abilities lend themselves well to comedy. But there needs to be rules and internal logic to it, and absolutely anything has none whatsoever, so Neil is free to do whatever he likes. Immediately, this puts the film in an awkward position because tonally it is all over the place, because it has no sense of consistency with often jarring results. For example, Neil first discovers his powers when he obliviously wishes his unruly class be obliterated by aliens, only for it to come true. It's the sort of darkly absurd gag you'd expect from a Python like Jones, but it comes across as oddly distasteful and ends up ruining the joke completely with a TV news report that wonders if it's a terrorist attack, which puts the event into an odd realism it was better off ignoring. The film is full of strange moments like that, where the gags feel misaligned or off in their timing because the setup doesn't feel entirely thought through. A lot of the time the humour is basically variations of the same joke, where Neil asked for something but he wasn't specific enough or didn't word it correctly, so the wish will be granted literally and he'll have to correct it. It's amusing in some instances, but that pedantic thinking becomes predictable and tiresome after a while, especially when it's clearly being done to force a laugh rather than it coming organically. Going back to Bruce, that movie had a very firm rule that he couldn't change people's free will, but anything flouts that by having a subplot where Neil wishes his friend Ray, played by Sanjeev Bhaskar, is quote worshipped by his crush Miss Pringle, played by Emma Pearson, who ends up creating an entire religion around Ray and stalking him with her followers. This running gag ends up becoming unintentionally uneasy because that manipulation, plunging into the chasm that Bruce sidestepped around, and the creepiness of the scenario ends up negating its humour despite being a farce. The best way to describe the film is scattershot, in that it just throws everything at the wall and sees what sticks, and unfortunately a lot of it doesn't, and the especially Bruce editing to remove even more misfires has left the film disjointed. Really, absolutely anything plays more as a collection of sketches and cut-offs than it does as a story. There's a lot of small sequences where Neil wishes for things with good intentions that end up having dire consequences until he takes them away again, like inadvertently creating a zombie apocalypse, for example. There's plenty of these bits that I did laugh at, but their brevity is both a plus and a minus. It means the duds are over with very quickly, but the ones that do work are only on screen for maybe about a minute before they're erased and never spoken of again, and not allowed room to properly build. On a plot level, it's hard to become invested when the main character can instantly get out of any scenario, at one point even rewinding time to make the last 10 minutes completely pointless, something which I've not seen since the abysmal Bewitched movie. But the editing amplifies this because it's absolutely dreadful, looking like it's gone through a bacon slicer and managing to make Josh Trank's Fantastic Four look coherent by comparison. Anyone familiar with the director's son's cut of Eric the Viking should know exactly what to expect. Terry Jones' son Bill is one of the producers, and the attempts at trying to up the pace has created a real mess where scenes don't even flow together. The alien's introduction appears to have been cut in 3 between 2 completely unconnected scenes for no reason. Whole subplots seem to have been gutted and characters simply disappear without resolution. Joanna Lumley plays Kate's boss, the host of a TV show on literature that actually hates books and uses it to bash writers in their interviews in an on-the-nose satire of the media who has clearly been set up to be humiliated later on, but instead simply vanishes even though there are remnants of her character throughout on ads for her show. Likewise, Eddie Izzard is the school's head teacher who is very critical of Neil's laziness until he wishes for Izzard to like him, which is well played by the comedian right up until about an hour in where he just stops showing up. It makes the film feel terribly erratic, not helped by a number of obvious continuity errors that appear to have been left by deleted gags. At times, especially near the end, it feels like the only reason some of the jokes have been left in is because they're integrated in a way that makes them impossible to cut. By the time what appears to be a key scene where Neil must seduce Kate without the aid of his powers is simply skipped over, you do wonder whether Terry Jones's long absence has made him lose confidence in his own material or sense of timing. Despite how slapdash it feels, however, the movie can't be entirely discarded because that huge comic cast, who do manage to get the odd laugh out of the episodic material every so often. Although once again his choice of roles outside of franchise or Edgar Wright movies is questionable, Simon Pegg does give a lot of likability to his traditional everyman character and puts his comic frustrations to good use. He's especially adept at having to work with computer-generated elements that aren't there or holding a conversation with a dog, and is far better cast than he was in The Dire, Hector and The Search for Happiness. Kate Beckinsale unfortunately gets the love interest role, not aided by the fact that her subplot has largely been deleted, and is dragged down further by having to spend much of the time fending off Rob Riggle as the film's human antagonist. Riggle, as a British-hating American military man, spends the whole film relentlessly stalking and pursuing Beckinsale, and he's mostly just irritating and annoying rather than funny. And why should we care about him as a villain when Neil can undo all of his actions, especially in the awkward climax? The Monty Python reunion is also not a fantastic one, because although the alien concept is quirky, including their spaceship shaped like a jellyfish, the aliens themselves only appear for limited periods, where the only joke seems to be that they've adopted women's names, which is something of a waste of their guest roles. Eric Idle in particular only has 3 lines as a fellow creature. On the other hand, speaking of voice actors, Absolutely Anything sees Robin Williams in his final role as the voice of Neil's dog Dennis once he wishes him the ability to speak and reason, and although it takes half the film for him to appear, Williams is far and away the funniest part of the film as an excitable bundle of energy. While there's some unavoidable sadness about his presence, it's also a delight to hear his voice for the last time in a fairly prominent role. Although voicing a dog who constantly talks about biscuits and shagging is not exactly the best thing Williams has ever done, it's perhaps a fitting final bow for the comedian to once again be stealing the show and making us laugh. If you do see this film, stay during the credits as there's some brief behind the scenes footage of Robin Williams recording his lines that's been added in as tribute. With all the talent involved in Absolutely Anything, it's something of a shame to say that Bruce Almighty did this sort of thing better. However, that is a rather harsh assessment for what is a largely light-hearted comic tale that does occasionally raise the odd laugh, just that far too much of it doesn't work. It simply doesn't have a strong enough structure because it has no rules, and the hatchet job in the editing room undermines the film further by sacrificing cohesion for pace. That being said, it is still worth a look simply for the cast alone, especially Robin Williams' final role, but it's best viewed with low expectations. After the break, it's another UK TV show making a trip to the cinema. Welcome back, where the BBC Three series Bad Education gets a movie that will surely annoy Pedro Almodovar fans. It's coming to the end of the school year and immature teacher Alfie Wickers, played by Jack Whitehall, wants to celebrate by taking his class on one final crazy trip heading up to Cornwall. However, their plans of debauchery come to an end when they get in even bigger trouble as they're caught up with the Cornish Liberation Army led by Ian Glenn's Pascoe, who wants to use Alfie to incite a revolution, causing a national incident in the process. Oh joy! Another year and another attempt at trying to bring a UK TV series to the big screen because the In-Betweeners movies made so much money, even though everything else that has come out of this trend has been utter crap. And such is the turn of the BBC Three series Bad Education, which I have to admit, full disclosure here, I've not seen a full episode of. I've certainly seen bits and pieces of them while I'm scrolling around on TV. I might have seen about 5 or 10 minutes of it once. Trust me, I can say it. The film version is a fairly accurate representation of the TV series, but I don't understand why we have to keep putting series that have no reason to be on the big screen other than to fleece money out of teenagers who feel a sense of obligation because they're advertising this as a series finale. They've basically copied the In-Betweeners movie formula in that those two films were meant to be sort of series cappers. They were meant to close off the show, but they work as well as standalone movies. You can watch them without having watched the show, and that's how I watched them. I hadn't really watched the In-Betweeners either. That's, again, Bad Education, In-Betweeners, not really my kind of thing, to be honest. I didn't mind the second In-Betweeners movie, but, you know, that's kind of different. But here's the thing. The In-Betweeners movies are actual movies, or at least they make an attempt to feel like one. They're lit like movies, they're shot like movies, they're paced like movies, whereas the Bad Education movie feels like a 30-minute TV show just stretched out to 90 minutes so they can justify flogging you £8 a ticket to see it. And really, it's exactly the same as you'd see on BBC Three. It's shot in '69, it is TV lighting, TV acting, it's all close-ups basically, and it looks incredibly cheap. Even more, it's not actually a series finale, I've been informed. I went into this movie thinking, oh, it's meant to be the capper to the series, I'll give it some, give it some leeway for that. Actually, what they've tried to do to make it a standalone movie is that apparently all the series continuity and character development for the kids, that's all gone. It's all Jack Whitehall's show, which makes sense, he wrote it. And that's a big problem with the Bad Education movie, is that unlike the In-Betweeners movies, where you can sort of piece together the characters and work out their characteristics and sort of like them, the kids in the Bad Education movie, with maybe one exception, are just basically, oh, that's the Asian one, that's the effeminate one, that's the chav one, and so on and so forth. There's no identity to them. They're just a bunch of random stereotypes that have no character to them unless you've seen them in the TV show, in which case you're going to be really annoyed that they don't act like they do in the later episodes of the TV show, but essentially making this even more pointless than it already is. So what exactly is the Bad Education movie? It's basically an attempt to humiliate Jack Whitehall for the attempt of jokes. Okay. It's kind of funny that Whitehall wrote this, considering he's basically the butt of it the entire time. If you've not seen the comedian Jack Whitehall, he's this pampered, kind of wussy guy, a bit posh, and tends to like gross out humour. The movie basically exists to cart Whitehall into these scenarios where something gross will happen. The In-Betweeners movies were basically like that, where they just had set-piece gross-outs. But in Bad Education, all of it feels so mechanical, like, oh, we had to do this. How about we have numerous scenes where Whitehall has to get his junk out? Because that's hilarious. He has a penis, which, as I've learned this year from Search Party, is the most hilarious of all male organs. There is not one, not two, but 3 major sequences in this movie that involve Jack Whitehall getting his dick out. I suppose when you make a prosthetic of your lead actor's junk and essentially have to teabag the camera with it, you want to get your money's worth out of that prosthetic, because it was probably the most expensive thing in the film. That's why we're going to put it on top of the camera in a POV shot. Yes, that's right, we get a nutsack POV shot in this movie when Whitehall goes down a zip wire with his pants hanging down. And let's not forget the classic 80-yard in line, "I think my willy's gone inside me." Hilarious. And of course that same prosthetic is whipped out whoosh, when Jeremy Irvine shows up. That happens because we're doing posh humour as well. For some reason, it seems that in the writing process, Jack Whitehall went and saw The Riot Club and decided, oh, that needs to be in my movie. Because there's there's a 20-minute pointless subplot where Whitehall meets up with his old uni friends who used to bully him, but he convinced himself that they were his friends, and they get him to do challenges that are called Pube or Dare, so named because they rip out his pubic hair if he decides not to do them. So there's a scene where he has to teabag a swan. Guess what happens next? It's exactly what you're thinking. Yeah. There is no real plot to this, and that's a problem. Because, funnily enough, the movie's at its best in its final third when the plot finally decides to kick in. Which is funny because the whole Cornish terrorism angle, and believe me, Ian Glenn must be falling on some hard times to appear in some tripe like this, is kind of a bit weirdly distasteful. It doesn't really fit the bad education mould, but at least it starts feeling like a film towards the end of it, because they're in castles and there's sword battles and, you know, SWAT teams going after each other and things like that. I mean, the only other time that it feels like a movie is during the opening sequence set in Amsterdam, where Whitehall gets high in the Anne Frank Museum and steals a model and runs through the streets of Amsterdam as the opening credit sequence. And you watch the sequence and you think, oh, this must be why they can't go to Las Vegas, because everyone heard about this incident where Jack Whitehall desecrated a Holocaust museum. No, this sequence is completely pointless. It's just stitched onto the front of the movie like, oh, this movie was so cheap, we've actually got money to go to Amsterdam. Why didn't we make a movie where we just go to Amsterdam the entire time? I don't know. Sounds like a more interesting movie than going to Cornwall. And I found Whitehall really annoying in this. I find a little of Whitehall's shtick goes a long way, and his character in this, character of Alfie, is just aggressively stupid throughout the entire movie. There comes a certain point where you just go, I don't believe he would do that. Like, how can he be this dumb? And of course, that's purely because we need to facilitate a set piece where, you know, someone accidentally gets a gerbil fired up their nether regions by a tennis machine. You know, that's what we need to engineer. It just seems really forced and really aggravating to me. Especially because he's meant to be in charge of a class, yet he's dumber than half the students. And I know that's meant to be the joke. Trust me, it's not a good joke. What's actually quite surprising is just how much Whitehall dominates this movie, because it's got this quite starry cast, or at least you would believe it if you saw the poster, but the other series regulars are just sort of there. They get their own little subplot where they have to follow Whitehall to Cornwall because Whitehall has annoyed a lot of mothers that are after him. That's a subplot that goes nowhere. Nowhere. But this is, just like this subplot, goes nowhere either. It's purely padding material. And what's amazing is that Harry Enfield gets second billing. Enfield plays Whitehall's dad. I don't think he has more than 10 lines in the movie. He's just wandering around in scenes looking gormless, and I know that's Harry Enfield's thing, but if you're gonna have Harry Enfield in your movie, a fairly respected British comedian over here, give him something to do! Like, why are these characters in here? Oh, that's right, because they're in the TV show. Does the plot have any reason for them to be there? None whatsoever! I thought to myself at the start of this is going to be utterly unendurable. It's going to be really awful. I mean, let's face it, when you open with desecrating a Holocaust museum, you've set yourself a pretty low bar. But I'm going to have to admit, like the TV show that it's based on, occasionally, and I do mean occasionally, it stumbles onto a little bit of a laugh. I chuckled about 6 times or so. That's probably not something I'd like to admit to, but I did. And I was actually genuinely surprised that the script that Whitehall co-wrote actually has an attempt at callbacks and things like that. I mean, that's how low the bar is with things like this, is that I'm actually astonished when they do callbacks to the things that they set up earlier in the movie. You know, basic plot and storytelling. Okay, good. You've managed to achieve, you know, the simplest of plot mechanics. Bravo, bravo. But you see, that's the thing, these TV adaptations have set themselves such a low bar, aside from the In-Betweeners movies, that even a modicum of competency looks like an earth-shattering achievement by comparison. And really, it's better than the Keith Lemon film is not a glowing recommendation. The Bad Education movie is basically a TV show on the big screen. It looks like it's made for TV, acts made for TV, and is all around not suited for a cinema screen. Unlike the In-Betweeners movies, the move doesn't seem to have any other basis than the fact they could hop their coattails with another popular teen show with crude humour, but that doesn't exactly justify going to see something you can easily see on TV for free. I did laugh on occasion, but it's not exactly the height of praise to say it's better than the Mrs. Brown's Boys movie. That's it for this episode of Projector, so until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.